Okay, I think I've got it. I think we figured out what the problem is. Okay, super. So I'm going to be working on the Blue Moons quilt today. Okay, Vicki, let me know if this is all better. And I am now here with my video. Okay, Blue Moons is such an easy quilt to make. That's why I decided to make it for the Quilt Guild. I knew I could get it done in a weekend and wanted to start making that quilt with all of you today. So when I first made my original quilt, and I have that original quilt I can show you, but it's easier to show the quilt in the book rather than holding up the quilt in front of the camera. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Glad to see that you're all here. Elaine, I can hear and see you. Thank you so much. Loretta, welcome. Vicki, Kathy, excellent. Thank you all for being here. So I've been collecting fabrics for this quilt, and I want to show you what I've been collecting and what I've been getting prepared for. So I have that back on my workstation over here. So let me take you to the workstation and I can show you what I have planned. So I'm just going to move my my chair out of the way, and I'm going to try to angle that camera down a little bit so that you'll be able to see my workstation a little bit better. And I hope that's going to work. That camera does not want to sit at an angle. So I'm trying to prop it up so that it will see the workstation. Okay, good. Now I do have a camera view that I can use that goes over my workstation. So I'm actually going to switch over to that camera view right now, and bear with me while I adjust that camera to get it just right so you can see what I'm doing. Perfect. Okay, so I pulled out my Blue Moons box, and in that box, I've been stashing some fabrics that I thought would be perfect for this quilt. So as I go to quilt shops, it's nice to have something to collect. So I've been collecting these kind of spacey fabrics with kids in mind. This one I just love. It's got some little robots on it and some rocket ships. So I have to decide what is the flavor of the quilt that I want to make. Am I going to do something for young children, starting with this rocket print? Or am I going to go for a little bit older demographic and go for those youth quilts with more of the rainbow sky type of fabric like this one? And they certainly could go together, but this one makes me so happy. I absolutely love this fabric. And this one, not so much. I'm not so excited about it because it really does limit your audience to a younger crowd. So let's continue to work on this fabric color combination and see if that's the direction I want to go. So let's look at the quilt itself and see where we are on choosing fabrics. Well, we're choosing fabrics for this background right here. I'm sorry, for this border right here. That is my most important fabric. And that's the one that I think would be gorgeous in this print. Then I'm going to need some other supporting prints. Like this fabric is used again here, and I've only got 2 of those in this quilt. I could do every other block with that same fabric and then choose an alternating fabric for the other block. So I really could get by with just that main fabric for my moon blocks and an alternating fabric for the alternating blocks. So let's see. It says I'm going to need 18 6 3/4 inch squares of those celestial prints for the blocks. Then, of course, I'm going to need my border fabric. I need 4 borders that are border 3. That's border 1 is that little yellow one. Border 2 is the middle one. Border 3 is this one right here. So for border 3, that's the bigger one with the celestial print, I need 7.5 yards by the length of the fabric, which is the actual border size measured in step K. So I can get an estimate of this border right here because my quilt is 52 by 64. So 64 is the measurement I need for that long border. I'll probably go about 55 or 56 just to be sure. So I know I have enough of this fabric for the border. Will I have enough for 18 more 6 3/4 inch squares? If I do, then I can use this print for all of my moons and then choose a second print for my alternating squares. Now, if I don't have enough of this print, I do have some other prints in my box. So let's see. This print also has the rockets on it, but it's not quite as childlike as this one with the rockets. And I like the background fabric better because it's really made to go with this fabric. It's not, I don't think it's the same line of fabric, but they go well together because of the darkness of the background. It's almost black. In fact, it is black in both of those prints, where this one has more blue in it than black. It's about half black and half blue. So I think that if I run out of this print, I'm going to use this print also. But look, wait, I picked out more fabrics that go together. So I've got this pretty little speckled fabric with the dots in it. Looks like planets and stars. That's really gorgeous. So I could certainly use this as the alternating fabric. So this could be my alternating fabric. This one can be my main fabric. And if I don't have enough of the main fabric, I can substitute this one. These two could alternate on my moon blocks. So I'm pretty happy right now. I think I've got what I need. So this could also be the small border, not the tiny one. That one I'm going to use my yellow. But then the middle border here could be this fabric. And then this is my celestial print there. So am I going to like this print as a small border next to this one? These two together, and then say either a black border or my yellow border that picks up on the yellow for the moons. So let's take a look at that. I think we need to move it over here. So the border would probably be about this wide. This border is going to be about 7.5 inches. So let me fold that up a couple of times to make it a little bit smaller. So there would be my borders. I can either go with the black or with a yellow. And then I've got this pretty border. You know what might be fun too? I might not necessarily go with the black or the yellow. Maybe I could pick up on the blue over here, or even one of the other colors in these prints. I really like that teal blue or maybe the sky blue. So that might be kind of fun instead of the yellow. Now, I could put blue in the spot of the moons. So it really could be a blue moon quilt. But I feel as though that yellow and all the different shades of the gold are more true to what a moon really looks like. Not really a blue moon, but the blue comes from the background. The moon color would be yellow. So I think I'm going to be happier with that if I stick to the yellow here. And if I stick to the yellow here, I probably want that little strip of yellow out here. Although I think the black would look fabulous out here. And I could put a little piping of the yellow on the outside where I have the binding. And that might be enough yellow for this quilt. So I'm not going to decide on that first border right now, but I am going to decide that my moon color is going to be gold or yellow. Now, the yellow that I used in this particular quilt was the So Batik yellow. And because the So Batik has a gradation of fabric from light yellow all the way to dark yellow. This all came from one fabric, all these different shades of yellow moons. Now, I don't have any more of that So Batik fabric. I probably need to get some, but right now I don't have any. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to use all of my yellow prints. Whatever yellow fabrics I can find in my stash, that's what I'm going to use for my moons. Now, I struggle with this because this fabric is very cute and contemporary and childlike, and this fabric is more traditional, and it's a little bit floral. It's got some leaves and some feathers in it. So this is much more traditional than this. But I think with that moon only being a small little crescent, what you're going to see is the color and not the flavor, what I call the flavor of the fabric or the style of the fabric. So I'm going to proceed as if I'm going to use this yellow. And then you can let me know in the comments if you think that this is too traditional and I should go ahead and order some more yellow fabric from So Batik that goes from light yellow to dark yellow. Let me know in the comments what choice you would make. All right, now I do have a couple of other fabrics in here. I have my original fabric from this quilt, the quilt that's in the book. Oh, no, it's not the original fabric, but it's a similar fabric that I had already cut for my borders. I knew that if I wanted to make this quilt again and I couldn't find that fabric, that this fabric would be perfect. But you know what? My new fabric has a blue background, a black background, and this fabric has a blue and black background. And I don't love the two of those together. So I'm going to set aside those borders that I had already cut, and I'm going to save that for my next version of this quilt. So I'm going to put aside the blue and only work with the black background fabric. So that brings up this fabric, and I used this in my Caterpillar demonstration the other day. I made a blue moon with my Caterpillar ladies from that demonstration that I did. And I used this celestial fabric because I didn't have a lot of it, so I just used it for the demo piece. And it's not that bright blue like the quilt in the book. It's not the bright blue like these borders. It doesn't really go with that bright blue. And it's not the black of this fabric. So it doesn't really go with that either. So I ended up using this fabric just for my Caterpillar demonstration. And I'm going to take it out of that box. Well, my box is for all my blue moons. So I'm going to leave it in the box, but I'm not going to use it for this quilt. So what else is in the box? Well, I have the matching fabric, the one that I originally used in the quilt, in the book. I have enough for borders for these two fabrics, so I'm going to set that aside for another quilt. But I don't have any more of this blue fabric. So what I should do is take a little sample of this blue and this blue, leave it in my purse in a little Ziploc bag, and that way whenever I get to a quilt shop, I can find another print like this or something that blends with this. So I'm not going to let this fabric go to waste. I want to be able to make another quilt using the blue backgrounds, but I don't have enough of this for another quilt. So let me go ahead and cut some samples of that, put it in my purse, and then the next time I go shopping for fabric, I'm going to find something that's going to blend with these. Now, why do I make these quilts over and over again? Well, because they're easy. This is an easy project that you can make for a baby quilt, and it makes a really good gift. So my nephew has one of these quilts and he loves it. So I think that for this raffle quilt, somebody else is going to love this concept and this idea for their child's nursery or for a slightly older child. So let's see what we're going to do here. The first thing I'm going to do, because I have some yardage here, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find the length of that fabric, the selvage edge of that fabric. And I'm going to put all my selvages together. And the very first thing I'm going to do is cut off my borders. So here we go. We've got all of our selvage edges together once. I'm going to put them together twice. And then I'm going to lay that fabric over my cutting mat, trying to get it nice and flat. So I'm actually going to hold it up. I'm holding it up by its selvages, and I'm just flapping it around to try to get all those layers nice and flat and straight, and it's not behaving. I've got this piece over here that isn't getting straightened out. So let me just refold that. Okay, now I wash my fabrics. So when I wash my fabrics, I end up with all of these stringy ends because I didn't pay that much attention. And when I washed the fabric, I just threw it in the wash. What I should have done is I should have trimmed those ends. Some people like to run it through their serger so that they don't get all of those strings, but I do it a little differently. I just take my nice scissors and I clip those edges about 1/4 inch in like this, and it prevents those strings from forming, because instead of your string being 40 inches long, your strings are now only 6 inches long, and they just basically fall off instead of tying into knots. So if I had thought of this ahead of time, I would have clipped my ends, and then I wouldn't have ended up with all those messy strings. But because I didn't do that, I'm actually going to clean that up first. I know I said I was putting the selvage edges together first, but I've changed my mind. I want to clean up those messy edges first. So I'm going to lay my messy edges together, and I'm going to kind of straighten out that edge and get rid of all of that mess. So I told you, you're making this quilt with me today. So even though these steps are not, they're not sexy, right? I'm doing all of the things that you would have to do to get started on your quilt, even though it's really not the fun stuff. It's not the rotary cut applique stuff. It's kind of the boring stuff, right? That's all right. We're going to work on this quilt together. And we're going to get it done together. So my table is kind of out in the middle of my room, so I can actually move from side to side on my table. And I've just folded this so that the edges are together. Oh, sorry, I had my head under the camera. I folded it so that the edges are together. And now I'm going to come up and use my straight lines on the ruler and straighten out those edges. I just want to get rid of that ratty stuff so that I can not have to deal with it again. Otherwise, I'm going to have to deal with it on the end of every single strip that I cut. So I'm going to do it again for this end. And there's one thing I didn't show you, but I think it's important. When you're putting your selvage edges together and you're straightening out that edge, we have to make sure that this fabric lays flat. If you end up with a big buckle here and you can't get this edge right here to lay flat, you can see it's all wonky, then I have to slide my selvages one over the other until I can get that folded edge to lay flat. So if you don't do this already, if this is new to you, what is the reason behind moving those selvages side to side until this edge right here will lay nice and folded and flat? Well, the whole point is that this fabric was not printed on the straight grain of fabric. I've got about a 1.5 inch difference here. So if I tear this fabric, it's not going to tear straight across the quilt. So I want to even up that fabric. So I'm going to fold it again, And I just want to take off that edge of fabric that is uneven and make sure that I can get my fabric to fold nice and flat every time. So you may be wondering, aren't you wasting a lot of fabric that way? And the answer is yes, I am spending a little bit on that edge of fabric that I'm losing. However, the ease of working with the fabric is going to be so much better that I don't mind losing this 1.5 inches because it's only 1.5 inches at the beginning, at the leading edge. Then it gets thinner and thinner and thinner. So I'm not really losing a full 1.5 inches of my fabric. That's just getting those edges all cleaned up so that when I do fold this with the selvage edges together, it's going to be so much easier to work with. So I'm going to go to my full length camera here so you can see what I'm working on. And I know my head is cut off, but I really want you to be able to see the table more so than seeing me. But I can bring it up a little bit. Hopefully my whole head won't be cut off. So now that I have that fabric evened off at the ends and it's nice and more fun to work with, right? It doesn't have all of that mess on the edges. Now I'm going to put my selvage edges together. That's going to allow me to cut my borders in one piece. So I don't have to piece my borders. I grew up in a time and I started quilting in a time when pieced borders were not a respected way to make your quilts. And now that's not the case anymore. People are much more accepting of piecing your border fabrics. But, you know, old habits die hard. And I like the look of not having a pieced border. So I'm okay with keeping that tradition alive of not piecing my borders. Not everybody is okay with that. They think it takes more fabric, but as long as I plan properly and I plan for those borders to be cut full length, then I can purchase my fabric accordingly. And I'm going to cut the full length on the borders first, and then I'm going to use all the leftover fabrics for the piecing, for the other blocks that I'm going to make. Now I've got this wonderful Caterpillar mat right here, and it covers the whole width of my cutting surface. This table is just over 4 feet long, and this board is 4 feet long. So I can fit the whole board on my table. And if I cut from the ends this way, I can get a really long cut. So I love this board, especially when I'm making kits, because I'm able to cut across this way, or I can go over to this end over here and I can cut this way. But if I do it this way, I'm off of the camera. So that's why I'm not using this end of the table. But I'm going to make this first cut over here. And the benefit of having your table out in the middle of your room, I can use all 4 sides of the table. So no matter where I need to cut, I can cut from that end or this end. From this side over here, I can stand on this side, or I can stand over here on this side. So let's go ahead and make those border strips. So I have to refer back to my pattern. And I believe I said those border strips. Now I've lost my pattern. Here it is. I believe I said those border strips were 7.5 inches, but measure twice and cut once, right? We're going to cut 7.5 by the length of the fabric. So my ruler here is only 6 inches wide. So I'm going to switch to my bigger ruler. If I had my 21.5 inch square, that would be even better. But I'm going to go ahead and use this 15 inch square ruler. And I want to make sure I start with the 1 and the 1 up here in the corner. So when I measure across, I can measure that 7.5 inches very efficiently and quickly. Now, not only am I making sure that the 7.5 inch line over here is on the straight of that fabric, but I want to make sure I go across my folds over here as well and keep everything square and straight. Now, 7.5 4 times. That's going to take up a lot of that fabric. Oh, I got a little jog there. So because I've got a little jog there, I'm going to come and I'm going to square up this fabric again. I guess I didn't do a good job cutting, but I always like to square up my fabric every couple of cuts anyway. You can really add up some errors if you don't take the time to square up that fabric. So I like to, every 3 or 4 cuts, I like to square up my fabric. And when I make an error like I just did, I just go ahead and square it up right away. Now I'm going to put the 1/2 inch line up top on the fold, making sure it's nice and straight, 90-degree angle here and here, and I'm ready to make that cut. So I really like using a longer ruler. I should take the time to find my 21.5 inch square, because then I'm not going to get that little jog when I'm cutting because I've moved the ruler. But let me just make those 2 more cuts. And for those of you that are in our Ahead of the Curve membership, we already have Blue Moons done as a course in the membership for our Platinum Leaf members. But sometimes when I'm teaching the class, I maybe don't explain things quite as well as I could. So when I have these videos, I'm going to be able to update the Blue Moons videos in the membership and make them more complete and better quality. So if you're wondering why we're going through this exercise again, when we've already done it in the membership, well, this gives me another version that I can splice in and make the quality of that video even better. So now I have my I have my 4 borders and I cut them from the wrong fabric. Well, that's okay. I cut 7.5 inch borders from my border number 2. I was supposed to cut 7.5 inch from border number 3. So do as I say, not as I do, right? When I'm trying to film and I'm trying to entertain you, sometimes I make mistakes. Well, that's okay. It's nothing is lost. The fabric that I wanted to cut into that border was the fabric with all of the bright colors, and it fell down here. So let me get that one and get that one ready to go. So I make mistakes frequently, and it's because I'm doing multiple things at a time. And that's okay, because it is a learning experience, right? And you'll know if you make silly mistakes like I do, then you are just part of the club. You are just like everyone else if you make some silly mistakes. But we always say measure twice, cut once, right? Well, I measured just fine. What I didn't do is check my placement of where the colors go in the quilt. So we're going to do the same thing here again. And then what am I going to be able to do? I'm going to be able to use these pieces to cut out the second border fabric, which I believe was 3 inches. Okay, so these are 7.5. I'm going to be able to get 2 3-inch strips out of these pieces with just a little bit of waste. And then I'm going to be able to cross cut those border pieces and use them for the 6-inch squares of fabric 1. So I do need 6-inch squares of fabric 1, and I'm going to be able to use those borders that I miscut for the 6-inch squares of fabric 1. So no harm done. And I like to say that it's just fabric. Now, I know that fabric is expensive. I also know that I collect fabric, and maybe you do too. Well, the thing about collecting fabric is, boy, is it pretty. Boy, is it fun to have a nice, complete, and full stash, but it's even better to have completed quilts. So I'm going to challenge you that if you have a beautiful stash and it's all organized and you have every type of fabric in its place and you know just where to go grab that fabric, well, good for you. That's fabulous. But I want to use my fabric. And if I'm afraid of making mistakes, then I'm never going to make anything. I love my little saying, I'm brave enough to be bad at something new. Well, I just did a really bad job when I was cutting those borders. I really screwed up. But, you know, it's just fabric. And even if that fabric's not wasted, right? But even if it were wasted, it wouldn't be wasted. I would just make a quilt with that border. I've cut borders from it. I could just use that for the border of a quilt and not worry about the fabric placement as much. So don't worry if you make mistakes. Mistakes happen, and we just have to know how to deal with them in the best way possible. Luckily, I'm going to be able to use that fabric again, and it's not going to be wasted at all. Okay, so here we go. We're going to cut fabric number 2. I know that I have enough to cut my 7.5-inch strips. So I'm going to move on to the next section. I know that even when I cut all 4 7.5-inch strips, I have enough fabric left over to cut the 6 3/4-inch squares of fabric 2. So I'm going to skip that first step because we've already done that together. And now I'm going to cut this fabric into 6 3/4-inch squares. So the first thing I'm going to do is just same thing again. I'm going to take off the selvage. And I'm making sure that everything is square here on my ruler. I don't use the measurements on my board. I only use the measurements on my ruler. And I do recommend you find a favorite ruler company and you have rulers from that company in the different sizes. And this is a OmniGrip ruler. And this one over here is a Creative Grids ruler, I believe. Oh, no, they're both OmniGrid. So having the same company means the measurements are going to be marked in the same way, the same width on the lines. So when I go from one ruler to the other, I'm not getting confused. If you have rulers from all different companies, it's easy to get confused on how the markings are aligned and how you need to be looking at those markings. So I'm going to go and put the 1 and 1 in my upper right-hand corner like I always do. That way my measurements this way and my measurements this way are going in order. And now I'm going to cut 6 3/4, one strip, 6 3/4. I might need a second one, but I'm going to be cutting 18 6 3/4-inch squares. Okay. Now we're going to cross cut that fabric into 6 3/4-inch squares. So I tell you what, I'm going to make another cut from this fabric. I know I'm going to need more squares. So let's go ahead and cut another strip because I want to show you a little trick that I do in order to be more efficient with cutting. So 6 3/4, measure twice, cut once. Okay, I'm going to take 2 layers of this fabric and I'm going to put them together. If I leave it folded like this and I start cutting 6 3/4, I'm going to end up with a little bit left over. If that little bit is not on the fold, then I can't unfold it and get more squares. So I'm going to start cutting from the open end right over here and cut 6 1/4 across as many times as I can. But in order to be more efficient with my cutting time, I want to cut 4 layers at a time. So I'm going to line up another set of strips. So I've got 2 of my strips that are the length of the fabric. So the benefit of having my borders cut first is I'm cutting on the length of the fabric, the full length, whether it's 2 yards or 3 yards or whatever. So when I start cutting up this way, let me turn that around. I'm going to make sure all my edges are lined up beautifully. Okay, so that I'm going to get really precise cuts. I'm going to line that up on a straight line on my board. That way I know that the strip is not wonky. It's not curving like a smile. It's nice and straight. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to overcut. So I need 6 3/4. These ends are all lined up nicely because I had squared them up before, but I'm still going to overcut. I'm going to cut 7 inches just for that first cut, because I've moved all of this around, right? So this edge over here has probably gotten out of alignment slightly. So now I have a nice fresh cut and I can start cutting 6 3/4. But over here, I can get 6 3/4 out of this one too. So I haven't wasted any fabric and my first cut isn't wasted. Now I've got a perfect 6 3/4 inch squares and I'm making them 4 at a time. So I just offset those and start stacking them. I need 18. So I need 4 groups of 4, 6 3/4, 4 groups of 4. So here's number 2. Making sure that these are, the edges are lined up. The edge of the fabrics are on a straight line on the board, so I don't have a big smile happening. And now 6 3/4. 6 3/4. So yes, I am talking minute little details about cutting, and that's not a bad thing. Everybody gets, should I say, we get a little bit lazy with our cutting sometimes, and we don't really think about all of the steps involved. And we might have some brand new quilters watching today. So I do like to go through the very basics and the details so that our brand new quilters can get the confidence that they need to make beautiful quilts that are accurately cut, accurately pieced, accurately appliqued. So look, I've got my 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of 4. So there are 16. I'm going to take away one piece and I'm going to cut another 6 3/4 from this very last piece. Now I've only got 2 more instead of making 4 at a time. So I do like to keep my fabric in as big a piece as possible. And that worked out just great. Now, look, that's the first time that's ever happened. My blade just got stuck in that line where this folding board comes together. I haven't used this folding board all that much. It is from Caterpillar. I like this cutting mat because it fits so beautifully on this husky table. But that's the first time my blade ever got stuck in the joining, the fold line. Now the fold line is not on the lines of the board. So if I were cutting using the lines on the board, that never would have happened. But remember, I said I don't use the board lines to cut. I use my ruler lines to cut. And it just so happened that my ruler line was lined up with that fold. So you do have to be aware of that when you are using one of these folding cutting mats. Okay, here we go. We've got all 18 of our blocks ready to go. So now what do we need to do next for this quilt? Well, we need some Misty Fuse. And my Misty Fuse that I have purchased in a roll is 12 inches wide. Well, I need 6-inch squares of this Misty Fuse. Now, this might be a little bit hard for you to see because the Misty Fuse is so sheer. But I'm just going to take off a length of this Misty Fuse. I'm not measuring that length. I probably should have, but I'm not going to measure that length because that's going to take time. So I'm just going to fold this length of Misty Fuse in half. And I want to match up those edges as well as I can. Then I'm going to fold it in half again. So this is the roll of Misty Fuse. The roll is 12 inches wide. I need 6-inch squares. So I'm going to take my long ruler and I'm going to put that long ruler right on the edge of the Misty Fuse. And I'm going to cut a 6-inch strip. Now I know because it's 12 inches wide, I end up with 2 6-inch strips. So I'm going to unfold that Misty Fuse once. So I've got 2 layers right there. I'm going to unfold the Misty Fuse once here. So I've got another 2 layers. So now I'm going to cross cut just like I did my fabrics, but instead of 6 3/4, I'm making my Misty Fuse 6 inches square. So I've got 4 layers. Every time I cut, I'm going to end up with 6-inch squares. But I'm going to even off the ends because I'm not sure I got them all laying one on top of the other. Where do I put these little bits of Misty Fuse? In my Misty Fuse scrap bucket. So let's go ahead and I'm going to turn that over. If I were not on film right now, I would be moving to the other side to cut off those first leading edges, and then I wouldn't have to move my Misty Fuse and get it all out of alignment. But I don't want to have my back to the camera. That's not going to be a pretty sight. So I am simply cutting from one side, and so I have to do some little maneuvering with my Misty Fuse here. So I want to have 18 squares. I'm doing 4 layers at a time. So there are 12, and let's do one more. So there are 16 pieces, and there's just a little bit left over. So I'm going to need to make a couple more squares of Misty Fuse. So I've got 16. This Misty Fuse is 12 inches wide. So I'm just going to cut one strip 6 inches wide. Let's just do this. It's only Misty Fuse. It's not fabric, so I'm not worried about cutting a straight line very much. Let's get rid of that. I'm going to fold that in half, or I can just simply cut that in half with my ruler. Now, I'm not putting my camera down on the workstation because you can't really see this anyway. You're better off talking to me while I'm in front of the camera. Oh, there's my last piece of Misty Fuse. So there we go. Now I am going to take you through the whole process of making this block. So if you've done this with me before, awesome. You're going to get a little review. If you've not done this with me before, that's fabulous too. You can learn to make this new quilt right along with me. If you need the measurements, those are all in the book. I'm saying them as I go, so I hope you've got a piece of paper and you're writing this down. But if you want to, you can grab the book, which has this project and I think 6 or 7 other projects as well. I can never remember which book has which number of projects. I'm using my applique pressing sheet. And I'm cleaning off that applique pressing sheet to make sure there's no fusible residue on there. Now, I do want to turn on one of my irons, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask my little lady to do that. So let me come up. I'm going to mute myself for just a second. Okay. I don't want your little device going on and turning on your iron or your demo station. There we go. We've got our iron on. Let's get that heated up and ready to go. So the next step in our process is to take those moon fabrics and I'm going to center the Misty Fuse on the 6 3/4 inch squares. So I'm going to take that Misty Fuse and just center it. So I've only got about 1/4 inch that doesn't have Misty Fuse on it, but that's a good thing because I'm going to be sewing these together with a 1/4 inch seam, and I don't want Misty Fuse in the seam allowance. So I'm going to go ahead and center the Misty Fuse on the back of the fabric. And if I'm careful, I can do a couple at a time. Now remember, your Misty Fuse is really thin, so make sure you only have one layer here. And then center that Misty Fuse on your fabric. Again, it's hard to see, so I'm not bringing you to the overhead camera because you're not going to be able to see the Misty Fuse anyway. Make sure your pressing sheet is clean because you don't want to get any fusible residue from a previous use on your iron. So there we go. I'm going to iron that down, and that's going to get that Misty Fuse right in the center of the block for us so that we can cut out our moon shape from the center of that block. And then the block is going to be fusible because we put that Misty Fuse on already. Now, I'm going to peel away that fabric and make sure that we have done a good job pressing the fusible to the back of the fabric. If you see the fusible pulling away from the fabric like it is right now, that means I haven't pressed it long enough. Let's give it a little bit more of a hot press. And I saw that happen on the first one today. The first one also, and I just kind of persevered and continued. So I ended up with a little bit of Misty Fuse on my pressing sheet. That's why we need to clean that pressing sheet every time we use it. Now I've got a little bit of fusible residue over here. I can see it and I can feel it. It's rough with my hands. So let's get rid of that Misty Fuse residue. I don't want any of that residue ending up on my fabric. And look at that. Oh, I don't have that camera on. Look at that. You can see all the Misty Fuse residue here on my kitchen scrubby. I don't want that on my fabric, so we're going to make sure we clean that off every time. The other thing is, I noticed it was happening and I didn't stop. I should have stopped and pressed that fabric again, but I was, just moving forward for the sake of the camera. Now, if you have more than one pressing sheet, we can make this all happen a little faster, can't we? We're going to take our squares of fabric, and the sheet is really big. It's 21 inches by 27 inches. So I can put more than one square down at the same time, and I can keep lining up as many squares of fabric and Misty Fuse as I can fit on that sheet. So I might be able to do 6 at a time, and that's really going to speed up my process. But you got to have a couple of sheets to be able to do this. So what I do is when a sheet kind of starts getting worn out and it's not releasing really quickly and easily from your fabric, so it's losing its non-stick property, then I will use that sheet on the bottom, and then I'll put a brand new sheet on top of this Misty Fuse so that I know it's going to release more easily. If it's a brand new sheet, it's really non-stick and it's going to release very easily when I press that fabric and fusible together. So using a new sheet every couple of years gives you, it's almost like getting a new pair of scissors, right? Or a new rotary cutter blade. It just works so beautifully that you say, oh my gosh, I should have replaced that sheet years ago. So the sheets don't last forever, but they last a good long time. So if you keep more than one sheet, it's going to last even longer, right? Because you're not using the same sheet all the time. So let's go ahead and lay it the long way. I could have laid the first one the long way as well, and I could have gotten even more done at one time. So little secrets to speed up your process. Having 2 sheets is one of those really nice luxuries that I have since I have been using these sheets for years. I have multiples of these sheets. So let me just get a little bit more pressed, and we need to move on. I'm not going to get them all done for the whole quilt because I don't want to bore you. I can do that on my own time, right? But let's get these done. And I just wanted to take a few minutes for the first set that I did to cool down. When these are warm, they're tacky. So I don't want to use those right away. I want to let them cool down for about 10 or 15 minutes. Now, they haven't had time to cool down that much, but I'm going to be able to use them anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold my fabric so it's fusible sides out. As long as the fusible sides are not touching each other, you can go ahead and use them even if they're not completely cool yet. So I'm going to my rotating mat. This is the Caterpillar mat. I like the Caterpillar mat because it's translucent and I can see right through that mat, especially if I'm using the Caterpillar board. And the Caterpillar board has a light under it, so I can see right through. Now, I am not using the Caterpillar light up board right now, so I don't have that benefit. But I'm going to try using this board anyway. It's new to me. I don't have a recommendation on it because it's brand new to me. I want to use it for a while so that I can give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down on their rotating mat. Okay. The benefit of their rotating mat is it's a lot less expensive than the Martelli mat. But I don't even have these on my website yet. I only have the Martelli rotating mat on my website because that one's tried and true. I've been using the Martelli mat for years. And I know that it's a great product. This one's brand new to me, so I'm not going to endorse it. I'm not going to bash it until I've used it for a while and see how I like it. So I want to explain to you what I just did. I took that 6 3/4 inch square. I put the Misty Fuse on the center of it, 6 inches. So there's an extra 1/4 of an inch all the way around that does not have fusible. Now I'm going to fold that in half on the diagonal. That's giving me a point at the top. And I'm placing that point on my crosshairs of my board here and here. So the point is going through my centering line and the fold is running right on top of my centering line horizontally. That way I can take my Hearts and More ruler that's going to cut a perfect 5-inch circle from the middle of that square. I'm going to place the crosshairs on my Hearts and More 5-inch template right on the crosshairs of the cutting mat. Now the Martelli mat has the same crosshairs. So you can do this either with the Caterpillar mat or the Martelli mat that I generally use. And we're just cutting out that 5-inch circle from the middle of our 6 3/4 inch square. Now there's one more step to making this pretty little block. We're going to take that resulting piece, that 5-inch circle, we're going to leave it folded and we're going to cut out that circle with a 4-inch circle. So I'm going to lay it right back out on the board with the centering line going through the center of the circle. And I'm going to match up my crosshairs, but this time, instead of the 5-inch circle, I'm using a 4-inch circle. That is going to cut down that circle from 5 to 4, and it's going to leave me with a pretty little 1/2-inch ring. I missed a thread there. Okay. So now I've got a pretty little 1/2-inch ring. That's a bonus piece. I'm not going to use this in the quilt. I might use it for a different quilt. So I'm going to put that aside. And what I like to do with those is put it in a folded, like a manila folder. That way they don't get all wrinkly. So now I'm going to take that 4-inch piece that I've just cut And I want to match it back up with the same fabric that I cut it from. So I'm going to look at those two and I'm saying, okay, that's not it. It's right here that these two moons, this moon here lines up, or that sun, whatever it is, that planet lines up right here and here. So I want to use the same fabric. And I'm going to take that yellow bit that I had before. I'm looking for that yellow fabric. And I need at least a 5-inch square of that yellow fabric. I really want a true 6-inch square. I don't have one that's quite 6 inches. So I'm just going to demonstrate with this one because I love the color yellow. It's brighter than the one I was using before. That was a little bit more subdued. This one's brighter, it's prettier, and it is more contemporary. It's more fun looking fabric. So I'm going to place that underneath, and then I'm going to line up where that fabric comes together. So I can do it just about anywhere. To make my moon, my crescent moon, it can rotate, right? I can have them touching here. I can have them touching up here. I can have it touching over here. So my moon can go in any different direction. And I'm going to move that around until I think it looks most pretty, most pleasing. I like it right there. I think that's really cool how this moon is separated, where that planet is separated. I'm going to twist it just a tiny little bit to make it look really pretty. And now on my applique pressing sheet, I'm going to press this moon. So this is step number 1 on making the Blue Moons quilt. If you can, whoops, you can see that moon all ready to go. I'm going to press these together. Then I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch this with a blanket stitch. After stitching with a blanket stitch, then I'm going to piece my Blue Moons quilt together just like any other quilt. I'm going to use my blocks that are stitched. I'm going to trim them down to exactly the size that's called for in the pattern. And let me tell you what size that is. Our alternating blocks are cut 6 3/4. These blocks were cut 6 3/4, so I don't need to square anything up. I'm going to make my Blue Moons like this. I'm going to make my alternating blocks the same size, and then I'm going to piece together the alternating blocks and the Blue Moon blocks that are all stitched with the blanket stitch. So those are the steps involved in making the Blue Moons quilt. I know that this quilt is going to be really a popular quilt when we have our raffle for my guild. So I'm excited to donate the Blue Moons quilt to a good cause. This quilt is so fast and easy that you could certainly make this for a raffle quilt, a charity quilt, or anything else. Okay. Elaine says, I wonder if you have a gradations with yellow and blue and green. So Elaine's suggesting that maybe I can bring in more colors so that I have more colors in my moons and more colors in that strip that goes around the borders. Great idea, Elaine. Mary says, I didn't know that I make mistakes. I'm the queen of unsewing, she says. Okay. Could I have applied Misty Fuse to the strip before cutting the squares to save time? That's a question from Elaine. Elaine, I wouldn't, because I want my Misty Fuse strip centered. I'm sorry. I want my Misty Fuse square centered on this square. I don't want any Misty Fuse in the seam allowance, because that's going to be hard to press your seams, whether you press them to one side or press them open. You're not going to want to press seams if they have Misty Fuse in the seam. So I'm not going to put the Misty Fuse on the big long strip first and then cut it into squares. I'm going to do it one square at a time. There's only 18 of them, so it goes pretty quickly, especially if you have the 2 pressing sheets and you can do a whole bunch of them at once. If I had laid out my pressing sheet on my big board, That sheet is 21 by 27. I could have done 3 by 4 or even, 4 would be enough. So I could do 12 at a time, and then it's going to go quick and easy to get those 18 done. Maybe I'll do 9 at a time, 3 by 3, do that twice, and then they're done. So it doesn't really make sense to do it any other way. Okay, super. Great, great questions. Loretta likes my choice of fabrics. Okay, thank you for that. Jody, welcome. Hello, nice to see you. All right, if there are any other questions, do pop them in the chat. And let me tell you a little bit about my YouTube channel and my Facebook channel. Facebook has just decided that they're going to remove all of my Facebook Lives. So I have my work cut out for me, taking those Facebook Lives, downloading them, and uploading them to YouTube. So I have decided that I'm going to go to YouTube instead of Facebook for these lives. In the interim, while people are used to going to Facebook, I'm still going to go to Facebook for a little while longer. But once I transfer everything over to YouTube, you're only going to find me on YouTube. So I'm going to tell you right now, do me a favor. Go over to YouTube and search for Sue Pellin Designs and like and subscribe to my channel. When you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, whenever I go live, you'll get there's a little bell icon. You can press that bell icon and you'll be notified anytime I go live. YouTube in the long run is going to be a better platform for me to grow my visibility because YouTube is a search engine. You can search any of my previous Facebook Lives for the content, and you're going to be able to find the one that you want. Facebook is not used as a search engine, so you don't have the same searching capabilities on Facebook as YouTube. So in the long run, YouTube is going to be a better choice for my business, but I want to condition all of you to go over to YouTube from now on instead of coming to the Facebook Live. So I'm going to continue to run Facebook Lives for another month or two. And at that point, once I'm done downloading all of the videos, I'm strictly going to be on YouTube. So you can do me a big favor and go over to YouTube now. Like and subscribe the Sue Pellin Designs channel. Click that little bell icon, and you're going to be notified anytime I go live on YouTube. Now, I am going to continue this quilt in our next session of Sewing in Slippers with Sue. I have a lot of travel coming up, so I don't have a lot of time to be live on YouTube or Facebook, but I will continue working on this quilt so you can see the process of the whole quilt. Now, I am going to work on it in the meantime, so I'll get all of my moon fabrics cut. I'll get the fabrics fused. I'll even do the stitching, but on our next YouTube Live, I will do the stitching with you so you can learn some little pointers about how to stitch the moon blocks on our next Sewing in Slippers with Sue. So thank you for joining me here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe over on YouTube so you can get more great content from Sue Pellin Designs. That's me, Sue Pellin. And I love to share my love of applique with all of you. Thanks for coming today, and I'll see you again soon. Continue to put comments and questions on the YouTube video, and I'll get over to YouTube and answer all of your questions in the comments. Thank you, Loretta. Done. I love it. Proactive, on top of things. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.